The engine of the rental car sputtered as I pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Hollow Creek, Nevada stretched before me like something out of a fever dream. 23 years old, and I had driven across 3 states to take a job I found on a sketchy employment website. The town consisted of maybe 15 buildings, all sun-bleached and sagging, pressed between red rock canyons that seemed to swallow the late afternoon light. I checked my phone, no signal. Of course there was no signal. The last bar had disappeared about 40 miles back, right around the time the highway gave way to this 2-lane road that wound through increasingly desolate terrain. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and stepped out into the desert heat. The air felt heavy, almost solid, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. A bell chimed somewhere, the sound echoing off the canyon walls in a way that seemed to last too long. I spotted what looked like a gas station and headed toward it, my boots crunching on the scattered gravel. The dust here had a reddish tint, coating everything in a layer of rust-colored powder. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a physical force. The temperature dropped so sudden it made my skin prickle. An older woman stood behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up from a crossword puzzle, her pale blue eyes studying me with unsettling intensity. She did not blink for what felt like a full minute, just stared at me as if cataloging every detail of my appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew why I was there. "I am looking for the Hartwell property," I said. "Margaret Hartwell hired me for ranch work." The woman set down her pen slowly, deliberately, as if this simple action required great care. "You are the new hand." It was not a question. She pointed through the window toward a dirt road that snaked into the eastern canyon. "Follow that road for 8 miles. You will see a stone marker. Cannot miss it. Turn left. Another 6 miles and you will reach the ranch." I thanked her and turned to leave. She called after me, her voice taking on a different quality, something between warning and resignation. "One more thing. Whatever Margaret tells you to do, you do it. No questions. No exceptions. Those rules exist for a reason. We have had too many people come through here who thought they knew better." She paused, her pale eyes holding mine. "They were wrong." I nodded, uncertain how to respond, and walked back to my car. The sun was lower now, painting the canyon walls in shades of deep orange and crimson. The drive took longer than expected. The road deteriorated quickly, becoming little more than 2 tire tracks carved through scrub brush and red dirt. Heat waves shimmered off the rocks, creating mirages that looked like water, always just ahead, always disappearing as I approached. I passed the stone marker about 30 minutes later. It was impossible to miss, just as the woman had said. A weathered pillar of dark stone stood at least 10 feet tall, covered in symbols I did not recognize. They looked carved rather than painted, deep grooves in the rock that must have taken incredible effort to create. Some looked almost like letters from an alphabet I had never seen. Others were geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long, as if my eyes could not quite focus on their angles. I turned onto an even rougher path. My rental car bottomed out twice on rocks I could not avoid, the scraping sound making me wince. The ranch appeared suddenly as I crested a rise, a sprawling compound of wooden structures spread across a shallow valley, surrounded by higher canyon walls on 3 sides. The 4th side opened out toward more desert, the view stretching for what looked like 100 miles. The main house was a 2-story building with a wraparound porch, built from dark wood that contrasted with the red rock surrounding it. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a massive barn that seemed too large for the rest of the operation. The barn dominated the landscape, its size out of proportion with everything else. It looked like it could hold 50 horses easily, yet I saw no animals anywhere. A woman waited on the porch. She looked to be in her 50s, tall and lean, with dark hair streaked with gray. She wore work clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt, and watched my approach with an unreadable expression. Her posture was straight, almost military, and she held herself with the kind of stillness that suggested complete awareness of her surroundings. I parked near the house and got out, my legs stiff from the long drive. The silence here was profound. No birds, no insects, just wind and the distant sound of something I could not identify, a low hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. "Margaret Hartwell," she said, not offering her hand. "You must be James." "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "Thank you for hiring me. I appreciate the opportunity." She studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes seeming to look through me rather than at me. Her gaze was penetrating, assessing, as if she were trying to determine something essential about my character. "You came a long way for ranch work. What brings a young man from Pennsylvania all the way out here?" "I needed a change," I said, which was true enough. I needed distance from my old life, from people who knew me, from memories that would not leave me alone. My mother's death 6 months ago had left me unmoored, drifting through days that all felt the same. I had quit my job, left my apartment, and spent weeks just driving, looking for somewhere that felt far enough away from everything. Margaret nodded as if this answer satisfied her, though I suspected she understood more than I had said. "Follow me. I will show you where you will be staying." She led me around the main house to a small cabin tucked against the canyon wall. The placement seemed deliberate, positioned so that the massive rock face was directly behind it, as if the cabin were using the canyon itself as a shield. The cabin was basic but clean. One room with a bed, a small kitchen area, a bathroom, and a table by the window that looked out toward the barn. "This will be yours for the duration of your employment," she said. "Your duties are straightforward. Feed the livestock, maintain the fences, keep the property clean. I am often away on business, so you will be alone frequently, sometimes for days at a time. You need to be comfortable with isolation." "Understood," I said. Isolation sounded good to me. I had come here to be alone. Margaret reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper was thick, almost like parchment, and yellowed with age. "Before you begin, you need to understand something. This ranch operates according to specific rules. These rules are not suggestions. They are not negotiable. They are absolute. Every person who has worked here has received these same rules. Those who followed them completed their contracts safely. Those who did not." She paused, her expression darkening. "Well, let us just say that following the rules is in your best interest." She handed me the paper. I unfolded it carefully and read. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its uniformity. 1. Never enter the barn between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., not for any reason. Not if you hear sounds. Not if you think something is wrong. Wait for daylight. 2. If you find any animal carcasses on the property, burn them immediately. Do not bury them. Do not examine them. Do not touch them more than necessary. Burn them completely until only ash remains. 3. The well behind the main house is off limits. Do not drink from it. Do not look into it. Do not approach it after dark. The water is not safe. 4. If you hear your name being called and you cannot see who is calling, do not answer. Go inside immediately and lock the doors. Wait at least 1 hour before going back outside. 5. There are no horses on this property. There have never been horses on this property. If you see a horse, it is not a horse. Do not approach it. Do not speak to it. Get inside immediately. I looked up from the paper, confused. Some of these rules seemed arbitrary, almost paranoid. Margaret was watching me closely, gauging my reaction. "I do not understand," I said. "Some of these seem." I trailed off, unsure how to phrase my concern without offending her. She cut me off. "Seem what, strange? Unnecessary? Paranoid?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping lower. "I have owned this ranch for 30 years. Every hand who followed these rules walked away unharmed. Every hand who broke them." She paused. "Let us say you are not the first person I have hired, but you could be the first in 5 years to finish out their contract." 5 years, I repeated. "You have not had anyone complete a contract in 5 years. The last person who made it through was a woman named Sarah Chen. She followed every rule to the letter and left with enough money to start her own business in California. Before her." Margaret shook her head. "I would rather not discuss it. Just know that the rules exist for good reasons. Reasons you do not need to understand. You only need to follow them." I swallowed hard. The silence stretched between us. The low hum I had noticed earlier seemed louder now, more insistent, though I could not tell if it was actually getting louder or if I was just more aware of it. "How long is the contract?" I asked. 3 months, she said. "Follow the rules exactly as written. Do your work. At the end of 3 months, I will pay you triple what we discussed. I will also write you a reference letter that will get you any ranch job in this country. That is the offer." I thought about the money. I thought about the empty gas tank and the maxed out credit card in my wallet. I thought about the fact that I had nowhere else to go. No job waiting back east, no family left to return to. My mother had been the last connection to my old life, and with her gone, there was nothing pulling me back. "All right," I said. "I will follow the rules." Margaret nodded, and I thought I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. "Good. I leave tomorrow morning and will be gone for 4 days. There is food in the cabin. The livestock are in the pens behind the barn. You will figure out the routine quickly. The goats need to be fed twice a day, morning and evening. Check the fence lines daily. If you find any sections damaged, there are tools in the shed." "Any questions?" "What about the well?" I asked. "If I cannot use it, where do I get water?" "The cabin has running water. It comes from a different source, one that is safe. Do not worry about the well. Just stay away from it." She turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. At night, keep your curtains drawn. Do not look outside after dark unless absolutely necessary." "Why not?" I asked. She looked back at me, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes that might have been fear. "Because some things notice when they are being watched, and you do not want their attention." That night I lay in bed listening to the absolute silence of the desert. No cars, no voices, no ambient city noise. Just wine scraping across rocks and the occasional cry of something distant that might have been a coyote. The sound was mournful, drawn out, echoing off the canyon walls. I thought about Margaret's rules. They were bizarre, but I had promised to follow them. 3 months of strangeness for enough money to start over somewhere new. I could handle that. I must have dozed off around 11, exhausted from the long drive. Around midnight, I woke to sounds that made me sit bolt upright in bed. Footsteps on the roof of my cabin. Heavy ones, deliberate. They moved from one end to the other, then back again. Each step was distinct, pressing down on the roof hard enough that I could hear the wood creaking under the weight. I remembered Margaret's warning about keeping the curtains drawn. I had closed them before going to bed, but now I fought the urge to peek outside and see what was up there. My hand actually reached toward the curtain before I stopped myself. Whatever was walking on my roof, I did not need to see it. The rules had not specifically mentioned this, but the warning about not looking outside after dark seemed relevant. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I sat in the darkness, my heart hammering, waiting for something else to happen. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. At least when I could hear the footsteps, I knew where the thing was. Now it could be anywhere. Nothing did happen. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back down, and I slept fitfully until dawn, my dreams filled with images of things walking on roofs and watching through windows with eyes I could not quite see. I woke to harsh sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains. My first thought was that I had dreamed the footsteps. Then I went outside and saw the tracks on my roof. They were visible in the layer of dust that covered everything out here. Large prints, but not human. Not animal either. They looked almost like handprints, but with too many fingers, all splayed out at wrong angles. I counted 7 fingers on some of the prints, 9 on others, arranged in a semicircle that should not have been able to support any kind of weight. The tracks circled the entire cabin multiple times before stopping at the edge near the canyon wall. I followed them with my eyes to where they ended, and found myself staring at the cliff face. There was no way down from there. Whatever had made these tracks had simply vanished at the edge. I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The rational part of my brain offered no explanation. These were not tracks from any animal I knew. They were not human. They were something else entirely. When I looked toward the main house, Margaret was standing on the porch watching me. She did not wave. She did not call out. She just stood there, a silent reminder that some questions were better left unasked. After a moment, she turned and went back inside, and I was alone again. I spent the morning familiarizing myself with the property, trying to push the strange tracks from my mind. The livestock consisted of goats, about 20 of them, kept in a large pen behind the barn. They seemed healthy and relatively calm, though they all stayed clustered in one corner of their enclosure as far from the barn as possible. Even when I scattered feed in the opposite corner, they hesitated before approaching, moving as a tight group, never letting individuals stray far from the herd. The barn itself was massive, easily 3 times larger than what would be needed for a property this size. The exterior walls were weathered gray wood, and the doors were secured with a heavy padlock. I approached it slowly, remembering the first rule. Never enter between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Did that mean I could enter during the day? I tried the doors, but they were locked. I walked around the perimeter looking for another entrance, but found none. Whatever was inside Margaret did not want anyone accessing it without her permission. As I circled the barn, I noticed something odd about its construction. There were no windows, not one. Just solid walls on all sides. What kind of barn had no windows? Even the door was unusual, made from thick timber that looked more suited to a fortress than a farm building. The hinges were massive, overbuilt, as if designed to hold something in rather than just provide access. By noon, Margaret had left in her truck, heading down the dirt road without a word of goodbye. I watched the dust cloud trail behind her until it disappeared, and then I was truly alone. The isolation hit me harder than I expected. I had wanted distance, but this was something else entirely. This was absolute separation from the rest of the world. I could not call anyone even if I wanted to. No cell signal, no internet, no way to reach the outside world except for the two-way radio Margaret had shown me, which she said was only for emergencies. The definition of emergency she had made clear was something immediately life-threatening. Strange noises and odd occurrences did not qualify. I spent the afternoon working. I fed the goats, which nervously approached the feed I scattered for them. I checked the fence lines, finding several places where the wire had come loose from the posts. I gathered tools from a shed and made repairs, grateful for the simple physical labor. It gave me something to focus on, something normal and productive. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, I returned to my cabin. I made dinner from the supplies in the small kitchen, ate quickly and closed the curtains before full darkness fell. The sun disappeared behind the western canyon wall, and shadows rushed across the valley like a living thing. That is when the sound started. At first it was just wind. Then I began to hear other things mixed in. Voices maybe, or something that sounded like voices. They seemed to come from the direction of the well that Margaret had warned me about. The well was maybe 50 yards from my cabin, positioned behind the main house but still visible from my window, if I had been foolish enough to look. I sat at the table, forcing myself not to go to the window and look. The voices, if that is what they were, rose and fell in volume. Sometimes they sounded like crying, sometimes like laughing, sometimes like words in a language I did not recognize, syllables that seemed to have too many consonants, sounds that human vocal cords should not be able to produce. Around 10 p.m., a new sound joined the chorus, a deep rhythmic pounding coming from the barn, boom, 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 like a massive drum or a giant heartbeat. It continued for hours, never varying in tempo, never stopping. The sound was so deep I could feel it in my chest, a vibration that made my ribs ache. I put a pillow over my head and tried to sleep, but the sound seemed to penetrate everything. It went through the pillow, through the walls, through my skull. When I finally drifted off, I had nightmares about being trapped inside the barn with whatever was making that noise, searching for an exit that did not exist while something enormous moved in the darkness around me. The next morning, I woke exhausted. The sounds had stopped at some point, but I could not remember when. My sleep had been fragmented, full of half-waking moments where I was not sure what was real and what was dream. I went outside to start my chores and immediately noticed something wrong. 3 goats lay dead in their pen. I stood at the fence staring at them. They showed no signs of injury, no blood, no wounds. They simply lay on their sides as if they had all simultaneously decided to stop living. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing, and their bodies were already stiff with rigor mortis. I thought about the second rule. If you find any animal carcasses, burn them immediately. Do not examine them, but I could not help examining them at least a little. What had killed them? They had been alive yesterday, healthy and active. Now they were dead with no apparent cause. I looked closer and noticed something strange. Their mouths were open, jaws stretched wider than should have been possible, as if they had been screaming when they died. I found a wheelbarrow and some gasoline in the shed. One by one, I loaded the dead goats and wheeled them to an open area away from the buildings. The bodies were heavier than I expected, dead weight that was awkward and difficult to manage. I piled brush around them, doused everything in gasoline, and lit it. The fire caught quickly, sending up thick black smoke that climbed into the clear desert sky. The smell was terrible, burning hair and flesh, acrid and choking. I stood back, covering my nose and mouth with my shirt. As I watched the flames, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The goat carcasses were moving, not much, just slight twitches and shifts, as if something inside them was trying to get out. I saw their legs jerk, their heads turn slightly, One of them opened its mouth even wider, and I swear I saw something dark moving in its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The movement continued until the flames consumed everything, and then it stopped. I stood there until nothing remained but ashes and bones, my mind refusing to process what I had seen. Dead things did not move. That was a fundamental law of nature. Yet I had just watched it happen. When I returned to the cabin, I found myself shaking. I made coffee with trembling hands, spilling grounds across the counter. What was I doing here? What was this place? Margaret's rules suddenly seemed less like eccentric precautions and more like desperate measures against something genuinely wrong. That night, I heard my name, James. It came from outside, a woman's voice that sounded almost like my mother's. The similarity was uncanny, the same pitch, the same slight rasp she had developed in her final months. "James, please, I need help." I was halfway to the door before I remembered Rule 4. If you hear your name being called and you cannot see who is calling, do not answer. Go inside immediately and lock the doors. I was already inside, but I rushed to check that the door was locked. I backed away from it, my heart pounding. The voice came again, closer now. "James, why will you not help me? Please, I am hurt. I need you." It sounded so real, so genuinely distressed. Every instinct screamed at me to open the door and help. But I remembered Margaret's warning and stayed where I was. I gripped the edge of the table, physically holding myself in place. The voice continued for nearly an hour, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes sobbing. It moved around the cabin, always staying just outside. I could track its position by the sound, circling clockwise, then counterclockwise, never stopping. "James, I am so cold. Please let me in. Just for a minute. I am so cold." At one point, something scratched at the door, a slow, deliberate sound that raised every hair on my body. The scratching moved from the door to the window, scraping against the glass in a pattern that sounded almost like writing, as if it were leaving a message I would find in the morning. Eventually, it stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. I sat in the corner of my cabin until dawn, unable to move, unable to sleep, just waiting for morning to come. When the first light appeared, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly, though I did not approach the door or windows until the sun was fully up. When I finally looked outside, I found scratch marks on the door and windows. They were deep, gouged into the wood and glass, forming patterns that looked deliberate. Not random scratches, but specific designs, symbols similar to those I had seen on the stone marker at the property entrance. On the third day, I saw the horse. I was repairing another section of fence when I noticed it standing at the far edge of the property, near the canyon wall. It was beautiful, a pure white stallion that seemed to glow in the harsh sunlight. Its coat was pristine, unmarked, almost luminescent. For a moment, I forgot the rules and just admired it. Then I remembered. There are no horses on this property. If you see a horse, it is not a horse. I set down my tools and started walking backward toward the cabin, not taking my eyes off the creature. It watched me with an intelligence that no horse should have. Its eyes were too large, too dark, and as I watched, its neck elongated slightly, stretching in a way that defied anatomy. The movement was subtle but unmistakable, like watching something adjust itself inside skin that did not quite fit. I reached the cabin and went inside, locking the door behind me. Through the window, I watched the thing that looked like a horse. It stood motionless for several minutes, then began walking toward the cabin. Its gait was wrong. The legs moved in a sequence that was almost right but not quite, like someone who had learned to walk by watching videos rather than through natural movement. The front legs moved too far forward before the back legs followed. The head bobbed at an unnatural rhythm. It reached the cabin and stopped about 20 feet away. We stared at each other through the window. This close, I could see that its eyes were solid black. No whites, no pupils, just pure darkness. Its mouth opened slightly, and I saw that it had too many teeth, arranged in multiple rows like a shark. They were wrong for an herbivore, sharp and pointed, made for tearing flesh. Then it smiled. Not a horse smile, not an animal expression. A human smile, lips pulling back to reveal those terrible teeth, the corners of its mouth turning up in an expression of what looked like amusement. I stumbled away from the window, my mind reeling. Horses do not smile. Whatever was outside was not a horse and had never been a horse. It was something else wearing the shape of a horse, and it knew I was watching it. It stood there for the rest of the day. Every time I looked outside, it was in the same position, watching the cabin with those terrible black eyes. It did not move, did not eat or drink, just stood and watched with that smile frozen on its face. As the sun set, I closed the curtains and tried not to think about it standing out there in the darkness. That night, I heard it walking around the cabin, not hoofbeats, footsteps, human footsteps, heavy boots on hard ground circling my cabin again and again. Sometimes it would stop at the door or a window and just stand there. I could sense its presence, feel its attention focused on the thin walls separating us. Margaret returned on the 4th day. I heard her truck and practically ran outside, desperate for human contact. I stopped short when I saw the thing that looked like a horse was gone. Only its tracks remained, and even those looked wrong. They started as hoof prints near where I had first seen it, but as they approached the cabin, they transformed into something else. Human footprints, except each print had 6 toes. Margaret got out of her truck and looked at me. Her expression softened slightly when she saw my face. I must have looked terrible. I had barely slept in 4 days, and the stress was showing. "You look like you have had a rough few days," she said. I told her everything. The footsteps on the roof, the dead goats that moved in the fire, the voice calling my name that sounded like my mother, the horse that was not a horse. As I spoke, the words tumbled out faster and faster, and I realized how desperate I was to share this with someone, to have another person acknowledge that these things had actually happened. She listened without interruption, her face grave. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You followed the rules?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Every single one. I did not go to the barn at night. I burned the carcasses. I did not go near the well. I stayed inside when I heard my name. I did not approach the horse." "Good," she replied. "Then you are doing better than most." "What is happening here?" I asked. "What is this place?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. She looked out at the canyon walls, at the barn, at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost sad. "Some places are thin," she said. "Thin between what is and what should not be. This ranch sits on one of those places. The rules keep you safe. They keep the boundaries intact. But they do not make the other side go away. Nothing can do that." "The other side," I repeated. She looked at me and I saw weariness in her eyes. A weight of knowledge that looked like it had been crushing her for years. Things that want to be here but cannot. Things that push against the barriers. The rules keep them from pushing through completely. You are maintaining those barriers even if you do not understand how. Your presence here following the rules, it strengthens the boundaries. It keeps them from breaking down completely. "Why me?" I asked. "Why hire someone at all? Why not just leave this place?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Because if no one is here following the rules, the boundaries fail, and what is on the other side will come through. It will not stop at the ranch. It will spread. To Hollow Creek first, then beyond. I have seen what happens when the boundaries weaken. I will not let that happen again." "Again," I said. "It has happened before?" She did not answer. Instead, she opened the back of her truck and started unloading supplies. The conversation was over. I wanted to quit right then. I wanted to get in my car and drive away and never look back. But I thought about my empty bank account, about the debt I was running from, about the fact that I had nowhere else to go. And something else too, a sense of responsibility. If what Margaret said was true, if my presence here really was keeping something contained, then leaving might have consequences beyond myself. 3 months, I said. "I can do 3 months," Margaret nodded. "Just keep following the rules. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear. The rules keep everyone safe." "Who is everyone?" I asked. But she had already turned and was walking toward the main house, leaving me alone with my questions and the terrible knowledge that I had 2 months and 3 weeks left on this property. The days settled into a disturbing routine. I did my work during daylight hours, feeding the goats, maintaining the fences, keeping the property in order. I found more dead goats, twice more, each time burning them according to the rules, each time watching them twitch and move in the flames as if something were trying to animate them from within. The nights were worse. The pounding from the barn never stopped. It became so routine that I almost got used to it. The steady boom, boom, boom that shook the walls of my cabin. The voices near the well grew more numerous. Sometimes I recognized them. Friends from high school, my father who had passed away when I was 16, An ex-girlfriend I had not thought about in years. They all called my name. They all begged me to come outside. They knew things about me, personal details that should have been impossible for anything to know. I never did go outside. I followed the rules absolutely, treating them like a ritual that could not be broken. The thing that looked like a horse appeared several more times, always watching, always smiling with those too many teeth. Once I saw it standing on two legs like a human, its front hooves planted in the dirt, its body swaying back and forth as if listening to music only it could hear. Its head turned completely around to look at me, rotating in a way that would have broken a real horse's neck. Margaret came and went, sometimes staying for a few days, sometimes disappearing for a week. When she was there, the manifestations seemed less intense, as if her presence strengthened whatever barriers kept the other side at bay. She never explained further, and I stopped asking. Some answers I realized would only make things worse. 6 weeks into my contract, something changed. I woke one morning to find symbols drawn in the dirt around my cabin. They looked similar to the ones I had seen on the stone marker at the turnoff from the main road. They formed a complete circle, and I had the distinct impression that they were protecting me from something rather than threatening me. I took photos of them with my phone, even though I had no way to send the images anywhere. I just wanted some record of what was happening, some proof that I was not losing my mind. The symbols were complex geometric patterns mixed with what looked like writing in an unknown language. They had been drawn with precision, each line exact, each curve perfect. That night I dreamed about the barn. In the dream I walked toward it at midnight, breaking the first rule. The doors were open, and inside I could see a vast darkness that seemed to have no end. It was not just the absence of light. It was darkness as a physical thing, dense and tangible. Things moved in that darkness. Things with too many limbs. Things that made sounds like grinding metal. Things that noticed me looking and turned their attention toward me with terrible focus. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart racing. Outside, the pounding from the barn had increased in tempo, as if whatever was inside was excited. I lay in bed, too frightened to move, until dawn finally came. The next morning, I found a dead coyote at the property line. But this time, something was different. The carcass was arranged deliberately, positioned with its head pointing toward the well. And carved into its side, shallow but clear, was a symbol that matched one of those drawn around my cabin. I burned the carcass as the rules demanded, but I could not shake the feeling that something was communicating with me. Something was using these dead animals to send a message I did not understand. The symbol on the coyote had been carved post-mortem, I was sure. The edges were too clean, too precise. Someone or something had placed this here deliberately. Margaret arrived that afternoon. I showed her the symbol I had photographed on my phone before burning the coyote. Her face went pale, all color draining from her features in seconds. "How long ago did you find this?" she asked, her voice tight. "This morning," I replied. She looked toward the well, then back at me. "We need to reinforce the boundaries. Tonight. I will need your help." "What do we need to do?" I asked. Margaret walked to her truck and pulled out a large canvas bag. Inside were dozens of iron stakes, each one covered in engraved symbols that matched those I had been seeing around the property. "We are going to drive these into the ground at specific points around the property. It will take hours, and we need to finish before sunset." We worked in silence, Margaret leading me to precise locations and showing me where to hammer the stakes. Some went near the barn, others near the well. Several formed a perimeter around the entire ranch. The work was exhausting. The ground was hard, packed dirt and rock that resisted every blow of the hammer. My hands blistered and bled, but we could not stop. Margaret worked with desperate intensity, checking and rechecking each stake's position. She measured distances with a length of rope marked with knots, muttering to herself as she calculated angles and positions. The placement had to be exact, she explained. Even a few inches off could weaken the entire pattern. We finished the last stake just as the sun touched the horizon. Margaret stepped back and surveyed our work, breathing hard. "That should hold for a while," she said. "What happens if it does not hold?" I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Then the boundaries break down completely, and everything on the other side comes through, not just manifestations and tricks, the actual things themselves, physical forms that can touch and hurt and kill." "Has that ever happened?" I asked. Margaret was quiet for so long I thought she would not answer, Finally, she spoke once 25 years ago. I was away for 2 weeks. When I came back, the boundaries had failed. The town of Hollow Creek used to have over 200 people. Now it has 15, the rest. She shook her head. They are gone. Some left after what they saw. Some. She did not finish. That night was the quietest I had experienced since arriving. No pounding from the barn. No voices from the well. No footsteps on the roof. Just the natural sounds of the desert at night. Wind and distant animal calls and the vast silence of empty space. I slept better than I had in weeks, though I kept one eye on the window, waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing did. The stakes had worked, at least for now. When I woke the next morning, I felt almost normal for the first time since arriving at the ranch. The remaining weeks of my contract passed more peacefully. The manifestations did not stop entirely, but they became less frequent and less intense. I still heard my name being called occasionally, always in voices I recognized, always designed to pull at my emotions and make me want to respond. I still saw the thing that looked like a horse watching from the canyon, though it kept its distance now, never approaching closer than 100 yards. But the aggressive pushing against the barriers seemed to have lessened. The nightly barn sounds became quieter, more like background noise than the overwhelming assault they had been. The dead goats appeared less frequently, maybe once every 2 weeks instead of multiple times per week. Margaret explained that the stakes needed to be reinforced every few months. It was part of the maintenance of the ranch, just as important as feeding livestock or repairing fences. She had been doing it alone for years, but the boundaries were getting harder to maintain. The things on the other side were getting stronger, more persistent, learning how to probe for weaknesses. That is why she needed help. Why she went through so many hired hands. Most people could not handle the truth of this place. They either broke the rules out of curiosity or disbelief, or they simply could not endure the psychological strain of knowing what was pushing against the boundaries every night. Some had quit after a few days. Others had lasted weeks. A few had violated the rules despite warnings, and Margaret would not tell me what had happened to them. Sarah Chen, the last person to complete a contract, had been special. She had worked here for 6 months, twice the normal contract length, and had helped Margaret understand some of the symbols and patterns that governed the boundaries. Sarah had studied comparative religion and mythology in college, Margaret told me, and recognized some of the symbols as being similar to protective wards from various ancient cultures. But even Sarah had left eventually, the weight of the knowledge becoming too much. She still sent Margaret letters occasionally, asking if everything was holding, if the boundaries were intact. Margaret always wrote back that they were, though she told me that the difficulty was increasing each year. On my last week, something happened that I will never forget. I was checking the fence line near the southern edge of the property when I found a section that had been deliberately cut, not damaged by weather or animals, cut with tools. The wire had been snipped in multiple places, creating a gap large enough for a person to walk through. I immediately went to find Margaret. She was in the main house, going through old journals that contained diagrams and notes about the property. When I told her about the fence, her face went white. "Show me," she said. We drove out to the location in her truck. Margaret examined the cut wires closely, running her fingers over the clean edges. "This was done from the outside," she said. "Someone or something cut through from the other side." "I thought the boundaries kept things out," I said. "They do," she replied, "but only supernatural things. This was done by something physical. Human hands with human tools." "Who would do this?" I asked. Margaret stood and looked out across the desert. "There are people who know about this place. People who think the boundaries should not exist. They believe that what is on the other side should be allowed through, that humanity needs to face it." "That is insane," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "But insanity does not make people less dangerous. It makes them more so." We spent the rest of the day repairing the fence and adding extra stakes near the breach point. Margaret seemed shaken in a way I had not seen before. The manifestations and supernatural occurrences did not frighten her. She had lived with those for 3 decades, but human interference, that was something different, something unpredictable. That night I lay awake thinking about what Margaret had said. There were people who wanted the boundaries to fail, people who knew about this place and were actively working against its protection. The thought was terrifying. The things I had experienced here, The voices and the movements and the wrongness, those were being held back by rules and stakes and constant vigilance. What would happen if that vigilance failed? On my last day, Margaret paid me in cash exactly triple what we had agreed upon. The money was in hundreds, crisp and new, probably withdrawn from a bank in some distant city. She also handed me an envelope containing the reference letter she had promised. The letter was brief but powerful, stating that I had worked under extremely difficult conditions and had proven myself reliable and trustworthy. "You did well," she said. "Better than most. You followed the rules when it mattered. I am grateful. I have a question," I said. "Why stay here? Why not just leave? Let someone else deal with it, or let the government handle it if it is that dangerous." She smiled sadly. "I tried that once. About 15 years ago, I left for 6 months. Traveled to Europe, tried to pretend this place did not exist, but I could feel it even there. The boundaries weakening, the things pushing harder. I came back to find the ranch in terrible shape. It took me 2 years to fully restore the protections." She paused. "Someone has to maintain the boundaries. If this place is left unattended, if the rules are not enforced, what is on the other side will break through. And it will not stay here. It will spread. To Hollow Creek first, then to other towns, then further. So I stay because someone must." "Have you ever thought about training someone to take over?" I asked. "Someone who could relieve you eventually?" "Every day," she said. "But it is not easy to find people who can handle this." "You did well, James. If you ever want to come back, there is a place for you here. The pay would be better, the contract longer, and I could teach you more about how the boundaries work, how to maintain them properly." "I will think about it," I said, though I knew I would not come back. Not because I did not believe in the importance of what Margaret was doing, but because I understood my own limitations. 3 months had been my threshold. Any longer and I would have broken. I shook her hand, loaded my backpack into my car, and drove away from the ranch for the last time. I did not look back. In the rearview mirror, I could see Margaret standing on the porch watching me leave. She raised one hand in farewell, and then she turned back to the house, back to her endless vigil. Now I am in Reno, working at a warehouse and living in a small apartment. The money Margaret paid me gave me enough cushion to start over properly. I found a decent job, made a few friends, started building something like a normal life. I sleep better here, though I still sometimes wake in the night thinking I hear pounding or voices or footsteps on my roof. The nightmares come less frequently now, once or twice a week instead of every night. In them, I am back at the ranch and the boundaries have failed. The barn doors are open and things are pouring out. Things that should not exist. Things that wear familiar faces and speak with familiar voices but are fundamentally wrong. I wake from these dreams in a cold sweat, and it takes me hours to convince myself that I am safe in Reno, far from Hollow Creek and its thin places. I never told anyone what I experienced there. Who would believe me? My coworkers know I worked on a ranch in Nevada for a few months, but they think it was a normal job. Just feeding livestock and fixing fences. I let them believe that. It is easier than trying to explain the truth. Sometimes I wonder if I even believe it myself. Maybe the isolation got to me. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. The human mind can create powerful illusions when subjected to stress and loneliness. But then I remember the way the dead goats moved in the fire. I remember the horse that smiled with too many teeth. I remember the symbols carved into flesh and drawn in dirt, and I know it was real. Margaret sends me a postcard every few months. Never anything written, just a picture of the desert or the mountains or the endless Nevada sky. I know what they mean. The boundaries still hold. The rules are still being followed. The ranch is still keeping the other side at bay. The postcards come regularly, always with a Hollow Creek postmark, always showing some aspect of the harsh landscape surrounding the ranch. I keep them in a drawer in my apartment, a growing collection of evidence that what I experienced was real. Sometimes I take them out and look through them, remembering. 3 months ago, I got a postcard that was different. Instead of a landscape, it showed the stone marker at the entrance to the ranch, the one covered in symbols. On the back, Margaret had written something for the first time. "More people are coming, the ones who want the boundaries to fail. I may need your help again. I have not responded yet." The postcard sits on my kitchen table and I look at it every morning while I drink my coffee. Part of me wants to ignore it, to pretend I never saw it. I did my time. I followed the rules. I earned my freedom. But another part of me remembers what Margaret said. If the boundaries fail, it will not stop at the ranch. It will spread. To Hollow Creek, then beyond. How many people would die or disappear if that happened? How far would it spread before someone found a way to stop it? Sometimes I think about going back. She said I did better than most, and I know she could use the help. The pay would be better. The knowledge would be deeper. But then I remember the weight of that isolation. The constant pressure of knowing that something wrong was always pushing against the edges of reality. I remember what it felt like to be that alone, that far from everything familiar, with only rules to protect me from things that should not exist. So I stay in Reno. I work my warehouse job. I live my normal life, and every time I get one of Margaret's postcards, I'm grateful that someone is still out there, maintaining the boundaries, following the rules, keeping us safe from what pushes against the other side. But I also know that if she ever really needs me, if the boundaries start to fail, I will go back. Because I understand now what she meant when she said the rules keep everyone safe, not just the people on the ranch, not just the people in Hollow Creek, everyone, everywhere. Some boundaries exist for reasons beyond what most people can comprehend, and someone has to maintain them, no matter the cost. Margaret has carried that burden for 30 years. If the time comes when she cannot carry it alone anymore, I will help her. Not because I want to, but because someone must. Last week I got another postcard. This one showed the barn at sunset, its massive silhouette dark against the red sky. On the back, Margaret had written 3 words. "They are coming." I've started packing my backpack, not because I have made a decision, but because I need to be ready. If Margaret says they are coming, if the people who want the boundaries to fail are making their move, then she will need help. The kind of help that understands the rules, the kind that knows what is at stake. My manager at the warehouse asked me yesterday if everything was okay. He said I seemed distracted. I told him I was fine, just dealing with some personal issues. He accepted that answer, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I have been a good employee for months, reliable and hardworking. Now I'm acting strange, distant, lost in thoughts I cannot share. Tonight I will probably make my decision. I will either ignore Margaret's warning and hope that she can handle whatever is coming, or I will get in my car and drive back to Hollow Creek, back to the ranch, back to the thin place where reality presses against something that should not exist. I know what my mother would have wanted me to do. She always said that when you have knowledge that others do not, when you have the ability to help prevent suffering, you have a responsibility to act. She lived by that principle, worked as a nurse for 30 years, often taking extra shifts and helping patients that other nurses avoided. I think about that now. I have knowledge that others do not. I know the rules. I know how to maintain the boundaries. I know what will happen if they fail. Do I have a responsibility to go back? The postcard sits on my table, Margaret's handwriting stark against the white background. They are coming. 3 words that carry the weight of 30 years of vigilance. 3 words that might mean the difference between containment and catastrophe. I look out my window at the lights of Reno, at the normal world going about its normal business. People driving to work, families eating dinner, children playing. None of them know about thin places or boundaries or things that push from the other side. None of them know that there are people like Margaret, standing watch in isolated places following rules that keep the darkness at bay. And maybe that is how it should be. Maybe most people should not know. Maybe the burden of that knowledge should rest with the few who can carry it. I pick up my phone and dial the number on the back of the postcard. It rings 4 times before Margaret answers. "James," she says. Not a question. Somehow she knew it would be me. "I saw your postcard," I say. "Tell me what you need." There is a long pause. Then she speaks and I can hear the relief in her voice. "Can you come back? Even just for a few weeks. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands. They have been cutting the fences in multiple places, leaving symbols. I think they are trying to weaken the boundaries deliberately. When do you need me there?" I ask. "As soon as possible," she says. I look around my apartment, at the life I have built here. The normal, safe, mundane life that feels so far from Hollow Creek and its horrors. Then I think about what will happen if the boundaries fail, if the things that wear familiar faces and speak with familiar voices break through into the world. "I will be there in 2 days," I say. "Thank you," Margaret replies. "Thank you, James." We hang up. I sit in the silence of my apartment, the weight of my decision settling over me. I am going back. Back to the ranch. Back to the rules. Back to the thin place between what is and what should not be. I start packing properly now. Warm clothes for cold desert nights. Work gloves for driving stakes. A journal to record what I observe. My phone, though it will have no signal out there. And the list of rules which I have kept folded in my wallet since the day Margaret gave it to me. I read through them one more time. These strange commandments that kept me alive for 3 months: never enter the barn. Between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. burn all animal carcasses immediately. Stay away from the... Well, do not answer if you hear your name called by an unseen voice. There are no horses on this property. Simple rules. Strange rules. Rules that make no sense until you understand what they are protecting you from. Rules that I will follow absolutely, just as I did before. Tomorrow morning I will quit my warehouse job. I will pack my car, and I will drive back across 3 states to a place I swore I would never return to. Because Margaret needs help. Because the boundaries are being threatened. Because someone has to stand against the darkness, and I am one of the few people who knows it exists. I am 23 years old, and I am going back to the ranch in Hollow Creek, Nevada. Back to the place where reality is thin. Back to the rules that keep everyone safe. Back to the endless vigil against things that should not be. I only hope that this time when I leave, the boundaries will still be holding.